everybody. Thanks for coming. It's a real honor for me to be able to introduce Roxanne Jackson as our visiting artist. I want to start out by saying a big thank you to Roxanne. She's been here since Wednesday. She did an amazing demo for ceramic students and sculpture students and MFA students on Wednesday, and had an exhausting day of studio visits yesterday, meeting with undergraduates and grad students. So I just want to give her a big thanks for her generosity. Just a little bit of information about Roxanne. She's a ceramic artist and mixed media sculptor living in Brooklyn, New York. Her macabre works are black humored investigations of the links between transformation, myth, and kitsch. Her work has been written about in publications including the Huffington Post, Hyperallergic, the New York Times, Gothamist, Beautiful Decay, Art Slant, Brooklyn Magazine, White Hot Magazine, Eyes Towards the Dove, Ceramics Monthly, Ceramics Ireland, New Ceramics, and more. She has been an artist in residence at the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts, Socrates Sculpture Park, the Wasaic Project, the Ceramic Center of Berlin, Hunter College, Watershed Center for Ceramic Arts, the Oregon College of Art and Craft, and the Pottery Workshop in Jingdezhen, China. Her work has been exhibited widely throughout New York City and abroad in China, Portugal, Romania, and the cities of London, Berlin, Vienna, Leipzig, Paris, France, and Belgium. Jackson is the co-founder of Nasty Women, a national international art exhibition and fundraising project, and Heather Metal Parking Lot, a nocturnal outdoor heavy metal party held each summer at the Wasaic Project in Wasaic, New York. Please welcome Roxanne Jackson.
Thank you for that very generous and sweet introduction. Also, thank you, Lindsay and Tamer, wherever Tamer is. Thank you, Tamer, for inviting me to be a visiting artist. It's been a great trip. I've met several of you, and I've enjoyed that. Is the volume okay? And thank you all for coming. So I'm going to start talking about my work. This is a piece that I made when I was in graduate school. So you can see from the year that it goes back to 2004. When I'm talking to students, I like to give a little bit of context for my work and go back a little bit in time. One reason I'm showing you this piece is because I'm not directly using imagery like this anymore in my current work, but there still are some themes. So I just want to invite you to look for those. And there's also some parts I still work with intestines. They've kind of creeped back into my work. So this piece is a ceramic sculpture. The antlers are cast out of resin. And the powdered pigment that's on the form is turmeric, the spice, and red vermilion powder. Before I went to graduate school, I traveled in Asia for a long period of time, and I was really drawn to a lot of these outdoor sculptures of spiritual deities that were covered in temporary powders and substances like these materials. This was a sign of someone's piety, so that meant that somebody visited this mirti or this spiritual sculpture and did their puja or prayer. And the temporary nature of the material is metaphorical for the fleeting nature of the ego and the temporary nature of the body. It also alludes to the immortal parts of ourselves. So this is what I wanted to do with my work, allude to this aspect, but use my own imagery. And at the time, I was sculpting a lot of disemboweled deer. I want to talk about the title. So I was in graduate school for ceramics, and I was making sculpture. And I was in a program surrounded by a lot of utilitarian potters, which is great. I like to drink out of pots. But when it came to visiting artists that came to our school, I would always vote for the crazy sculptor, and I would always be outvoted. So I would have these conversations with people that made pristine pots. And I thought it was interesting and curious, being very polite, that I'm having a conversation with someone just because we work with the same material. And that's what puts us in the same category. And so when I was having a critique with one woman who made beautiful, pristine porcelain pots, this is what she said to me about my work. So this is a direct quote. "There's already so much pain in the world. Why not make something beautiful?" So that became the title of my piece. And I was actually really offended by this because, what is the notion of beauty? But the benefit from that visit was that I got a good title. And also, she made me realize that one thing that I was talking about with my work or interested in doing was to challenge the notion of beauty. And that was something that was so ingrained I had never stepped outside of myself to even realize that was a thing. And then after grad school, I moved to Oregon. I was a resident at the Oregon College of Art and Craft, and then I continued living in Portland for 4 years. I had a solo show at a space called the Portland Art Center. That show was called Lost Wisdom. That space that I worked with was about 1,200 square feet, and I really wanted to create an installation with ceramic sculptures. So I built 9 life-size hyenas. They're all ceramic. Their eyes are resin. You can see here that there's a light inside the head, so all the eyes are glowing. I wanted to provide an experience for the viewer of primal fear. You know, I was thinking a lot about how we're connected to the animal world and our primal selves and how we really are animals. And I wanted the viewer to experience maybe right before they're going to be attacked by a clan of hyenas, for instance. I don't know why, that just felt really important to me. Instead of the fears that we have living in Western contemporary society of terrorism or a plane crash or, you know, being shot in the head with a gun, I wanted to take it back a few steps. So in this space, the only lights that were on in the space were the lights from the eyes of the hyenas, with the exception of when you would walk into the space through a black curtain, there was one light that hit you in the face, so you would have the sensation of feeling temporarily blinded by the light. And then as you walk through the space, your footing would be unsure because you can see here I covered the ground with 2 inches of bark. That bark was really fragrant. So really I was trying to simulate an outdoor environment. From the 4 different corners of the space, I was also playing sound. And the sound were recordings of hyenas laughing, which is a sound that they make when they're feeding, animals breathing, heartbeats, crickets, and these kind of things that were coming at a different tempo from all the 4 corners. You can also see that there's a black piece that's kind of silhouetted. In the corners, I did have hyenas that were painted black because I was trying to allude to more outdoor space and make the walls disappear. And then I surrounded those figures with black shrubbery. And in that shrubbery, I sprayed animal pheromone scent. So as a viewer navigated through the space, they might feel that they were encroaching on an animal's territory. And again, this was all in an effort to provide this experience that I found important. And so here's just a detail of one of the hyenas. There's just for ceramics people, FYI, the arm that's sticking out so far, because these are very large, is removable. You can see that seam. So instead of that piece breaking and shipping, I just built it kind of already broken, so it would come in and out. And the same thing with the tail. And then this is one of the first times that I was starting to gold luster teeth. See a lot more of that. And for a long time, I've been appropriating imagery from horror films. New work is more sci-fi horror, but previous work has been just direct horror films. Mostly a moment of transformation when a human becomes a beast, because I think a lot about what is a beast, and it's really something in between an animal and a human. And I also want to invite you to look for the humor in my work. So here's a quote that I love from David Sedaris. "I prefer my villains to be evil and stay that way, to act like Dracula rather than Frankenstein's monster, who ruined everything by handing that peasant girl a flower. He sort of made up for it by drowning her a few minutes later, but still, you couldn't look at him the same way again." And so I make a lot of heads, so I've edited down. I'm just going to show you a couple. I am a full-time ceramics professor. I've been teaching for a long time. And so this is my little nod to teaching here. And I say what I'm about to say with love. Sometimes I'll have a student that come in and they just want to be very, very expressive, and they want to sort of let out some of this teenage angst. And I can actually relate to that because I still have that. I don't think it's ever going to go away. And sometimes this comes out in images that might be a little cliche, metaphorical images. So this is sort of my take on that, or my version of that from myself. So here we have an elongated skull, and then we have a cobra snake intertwining, sort of inspired by tattoo imagery of a cobra. On the back side that you can't really see are flames that are black and white, and then a removable knife. And then this is kind of an experimental piece for me when I was playing around with a technique that I do with underglazes called marbling. And then skipping around now, a few more years later, I had a solo show in Brooklyn, New York, this artist-run space called Airplane Gallery. I really wanted to show as many pieces as possible. So in this exhibition, I'm actually showing 21 sculptures. At the time, I was working with ceramics and a lot more mixed media. I was trying to think about a way I could unify all the work. Also, the gallery was a fairly narrow space, and what I didn't want to do is bring in a bunch of pedestals and have like this pedestal forest in the space. So my solution was to build this, I had help, but a tiered platform. So this is site-specific. And what this platform did was it helped me kind of create a hierarchy of my work and also unite this work that varied so much in scale and also material. And then also sort of acted a little bit like a diorama, which I was really interested in. You could really only see it from these two perspectives. So I'll show you some of the pieces that were in that show. Here's one of them, Don't Stop Believing. So if it's not apparent to you, another thing that I want to do as an artist is to work with ceramics in particular and kind of blow people's expectations out of the water. If I tell somebody that I meet I'm a ceramic artist, I have a good idea about what they imagine in their head. Also as an educator, I really try to expose my students to a lot of different imagery so they understand that this medium has a lot of possibilities. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And so these figures are ceramic. The material that's connecting their vacant faces is yarn. So it's also, with this piece, it was really important for me to work with crafty materials. The hands of the gray figure are my hands that are cast from a kit. I was supposed to make prayer hands, a kit from a store in the United States called Hobby Lobby, which is a Christian craft store that's not open on Sundays and has been criticized a lot for not hiring gay people. And then there's some other materials there like track jackets. And then I kind of bounce around from working with different series. So I do have a series of these bust forms because the bust form is such a typical kind of trope in sculpture and ceramics. And often they're female figures that are very stiff. So what I wanted to do is show through metaphor, however people want to interpret it, but so much activity coming out of the head and the face. So I've made several of these. I'm going to show you a few of them and introduce this quote. Ponder this. Relate comic things in pompous fashion. Irregularity, the unexpected, the surprising, the astonishing are essential to and characteristic of beauty. Two fundamental qualities for art, supernaturalism and irony. Blend the grotesque and the tragic. Just to remind us all that these themes, people have been grappling with them for a long time in the history of art making. And here's another one from the series, Blonde Ambition, same borrowing from the name of one of Madonna's tours. So with this bust, the actual bust is ceramic, and there's some mixed media, as you can see, with the wig and the sweater. It was interesting for me, or I was more interested in putting a real sweater on the piece than sculpting one, because I find that to be a little more uncanny. And one thing, I have a story in my head about this figure, and that is that she was a cheerleader in high school, and she had great hair and was very stylish. So it's like that part of her is representing, it sort of goes back to the first image that I showed you, something that's very temporary and fleeting. But what's coming out of her head, and more specifically her third eye region, are stalactite forms. Those are built out of paper mache, so they're much lighter, and they're also removable. So what I want to do with this piece is invite the viewer to contemplate this juxtaposition, these two things colliding. One of this fleeting moment, something that's trendy and shallow, with the slow pace of geological time with these stalactite forms. And I see it as representative of her or our immortality, the part of ourselves that is invisible. Or another way that I can explain that is I see it as her psyche being pulled out of her third eye and revealed to us. And here's a detail. I'm going to drink some tea. And there was a couple summers fairly recently that I was curious to see what would happen if I don't have a kiln. What would I do? So I applied to some residencies that didn't have any kind of ceramic equipment. And I was working with paper mache a little bit here and there, as you just saw. So I wanted to really just see what I could do with paper mache. So I made several sculptures. This is one called Harpy. Harpy is a mythical creature that's part predatory bird and part female. I'm most interested, if I am going to make a monster, for it to be a feminine monster, because I think that's more terrifying to us, at least on a subconscious level. Because we think of females as being nurturers, domestic mothers, and I think that when we see something that's this terrifying and female, then it frightens us. It has like even more power, and it frightens us more. So here's my Harpy, and this has been created, obviously, since it doesn't exist in real life, to my knowledge. It only exists in artwork. So it's really important for me to find a new way or a fresh way to create this image. So I'm drawing from black metal, which is the subgenre of extreme metal music, and also this idea of neo-shamanism, like the new shaman. And here's a detail. And in line with this idea of myth and these feminine monsters, I also have a series that I've been working on for a while, a Fiji Mermaid series. So Fiji Mermaids were these objects that originated in Japan, and we first had one in the States in the 1800s. P.T. Barnum, who had circuses and circus sideshows in the States, rented one and featured it in a circus sideshow. So it was actually inspired, my piece here is inspired by the first one supposedly that came to the States that was in his freak show. Burned down in a fire, so it only exists in a print. So I thought I would make that in ceramic. At the time, a lot of people believed that these were real, proof of mermaids, that it was a real mermaid specimen. Really, it was corpses of animals, usually the top part of a monkey and the back end of a fish, crudely glued together. And here's a quote from this newspaper when P.T. Barnum showed the original Fiji Mermaid. "The sight of the wonder has forever robbed us. We shall never again discourse, even in poesy, of mermaid beauty, nor woo a mermaid even in our dreams. For the Fiji lady is the very incarnation of ugliness." So I think it's interesting, using that word, politely, that here is maybe the first mermaid specimen, and this is what people are talking about. And here's another one. So I did many of these. What I wanted to do is kind of explore all these decorative techniques in ceramics. So this one is drawing from the cobalt painting on porcelain. This is all fake, though, so it's actually decals and gold luster. And I do like to show sculpture in a real space, so I have included some installation shots. I was in a two-person exhibition earlier this year in Brussels with Robin King, and she's a good friend of mine, and sometimes we collaborate. More on this later in the slideshow. And so her digital weaving is in the back, and I think she's going to be visiting campus in the spring for a textile conference, so tell her hi. So here's an image from that. And here's a Fiji Mermaid, the most recent one that I made that ties into really current work that I've been making, which is part of my Alienware series. So you can see that this Fiji Mermaid has a head that's flayed open, and then you see the blue and white inside the head, and then you see a little thing coming out of her head, which is a predator mouth. More on this. And then this is just an image from NCECA. NCECA stands for the National Council on the Education for Ceramic Arts. That's every year somewhere in the States. It's always in a different city. So I was in an exhibition called Scofflaws. I saw Lindsay at the conference. And this idea, this word scofflaws, in case you don't know it, it means during the Prohibition in the States, so when people weren't allowed to drink or make alcohol, there was a lot of people that continued to drink and make alcohol. They were scofflaws. So this show is sort of about the ceramic scofflaws. Ceramic artists breaking the laws, which is kind of a nice, fun idea. And then we were also on a panel at the conference of the same name. And, you know, if you haven't figured it out already, I also draw from kitsch. When I was in graduate school, suffering from that experience, and then also suffering from the post-trauma of grad school, I would make ceramic work and obscure the ceramic part, cover things entirely in fur, for instance, because it was intense. And ceramics, I was just so tired of this conversation of art versus craft and lowbrow and highbrow and whatever. So finally, I was able to get over it. And I thought, instead of running from this idea, I want to exploit it and use it to my benefit. So now I directly draw from kitsch. So these are two of my swan planters. The one on the right is holding a plant that's called Midnight Lace, hence the title. There's an element of subversive danger in this piece because that plant, as you can see, is not green. That means it doesn't have chlorophyll and it can't photosynthesize. It can't make its own food. So it mooches off food from the plants around it. So there's an element of danger in this image of a swan and a swan planter that we might think is otherwise innocuous. Also, you see that there's a nod to the occult here with these black candles. Whenever I show this piece, I really try to let them light the candles at the opening. And so another element of danger that I experienced was one time the gray swan caught on fire. And so there was like real danger. We just let it burn because I'm like, whatever, my piece has been fired at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So what difference does it make? So it's a time-based art piece, constantly changing. And here's a detail. They're in love. And then their beaks are ceramic, but they're painted with nail polish like French tips. And then their nostrils are decorated with nail bling. So this led to another series, starting with this piece here. So this is my gorilla paw. Again, speaking of kitsch, but more tough kitsch. So this is inspired from the gorilla paw ashtrays that came out of Africa in the 70s, were sold to tourists. Those were actually real gorilla paws, so their hands were chopped off. Diane Fossey stopped that in the 70s. So the crystal inside the paw is removable. I was thinking somebody could actually dump the ashes out and put it back. And then the nails are painted with nail polish. This piece sold right away, and sometimes I have separation anxiety. So it just forces me to make another piece, and then I have a body of work. So here's a Yeti Paw. Now it's a Yeti Paw. This is much larger, so it's almost 2 feet long, so it's about this big, well, maybe more like this big. And now we see inside, it's an amethyst crystal, one of those that holds a votive candle. In the States, all of our money is green. So this is called money to burn, and the candle is green because there's this idea that if you burn green candles, that draws money into your life. And then I'll show you, oh, the knuckles are like tattooed knuckles done with underglazed decals. And here's a detail. I cut up a dollar bill, which is illegal. And then there's also bandana prints and other fun stuff. And this is a recent one that I made. I was in an exhibition last summer in Vienna, and this piece I was thinking about, again, these Hindu gods and goddesses. I like them because they're very monstrous, and their hands are really important. They're very stylized, so you can see the nails are a little more stylized. Also, this gesture is, you know, heavy metal, head-banging gesture, but it's also a yoga mudra. So I like that tension or that contrast that happens there. And just to show you an install shot from the show in Vienna, it was a 5-person show of female artists from New York. And that is my friend Natalie Baxter's gold flag in the background. And here's another piece from that show, just to show you one of my chrome pieces. When I did the residency in China, I worked with a series of artists that helped me make this kind of work. So I built the original. Then I worked with someone to make a mold out of it and someone else to glaze it. And basically, I created some pieces like this that were chrome plated. So some are bright gold and some are chrome. And this exhibition was about the occult and ideas of mysticism. So the piece in the back by my friend Jamie Steele is supposed to be like a seance, the tablecloth in a seance coming to life and turning into a witch. And now I'm going to talk about a series that I've really been focusing mostly on that I call Alienware, just because I like the wear part sort of, you know, is acknowledging the utilitarian part of the ceramics tradition. The The departure point for this work is the way that I build it is I start with an animal head, and it's usually like a beast. But what is a beast? So it might even be like a domestic cat, but the mouth's open. That's how I start, because it has sharp teeth. Or it might be an exotic bat, or it might be a baboon, something that's sort of terrifying, but also just an animal. And then through the process of creating, I deconstruct that and end up with an image that's a little bit more abstract. This is an early one, and I'm going to show you this for a reason, but you also see this texture here that's fleshy and pink. One thing that I want to do is talk about the hard palate, so the interior of the mouth of the beast, because that's where the activity happens. That's where feeding happens, or an attack, or the kill. It's also a part of the body that's both hard and soft. So usually this is a part of these sculptures. Also, as the form becomes deconstructed, it might remind us of other parts of the body, such as a rib cage. And here you see some things like intestine necklaces. You know, remember the intestines from the first piece. They're starting to come back into my work. And then we have some unicorn horns. Horns plural, because I don't want to just make one horn, because I'm trying to recreate this myth. And now I'm going to show you the other side of this piece. So because you're Canadian, I don't know, and because I don't know how old you are, I don't know if you know Predator. So surrounding my piece in the center are examples of what Predator is. Predator is a film from 1987 starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I was inspired to make the sculpture based on the Predator from that film for a lot of reasons. It's a huge thing in the States. It's sort of this sci-fi cult phenomenon. So it's very much tied to pop culture. There's been so many remakes of Predator, Predator versus Alien. I mean, crazy. I do recommend, if you haven't seen it, to watch the original. And you can see here that instead of sculpting the entire head, I just sculpted the mouth. I like that form, but I also like the idea of an alien being part of my work, because that's also about transformation and metaphor. So then this expanded to a whole series. I'll show you more examples. Here you can see the Predator mouth again with a lot of pink glaze, and then you can also see the blue and white on the interior of a head that's flayed. This is a wall piece. Here's another wall piece. Again, we see the flayed head decorated with blue and white. I'm going to show you what the outside of the head is. Well, I'll show you here, and we'll go back. So you can see, maybe you can see the outside of the head that's flayed open is a mandrill head, so it's a baboon that's really colorful. You can see the red nose and the blue stripes on the face. So when I flayed that open, I didn't want the interior to look like bone or blood or viscera. I wanted it to talk about ceramic history and tradition and decor, because I thought that that was more interesting and more mysterious. And then you see unicorn horns. They're pierced. We got some intestine necklaces happening. And just to point out, things are really separate here and delineated. So the Predator is, you know, these pink glazes. The interior is the blue and white. The outside is glazed more like an actual mandrill, and that changes later. And so just to give you a little clue, a little insight into the process, I build solid and then later hollow out. So you can see how I start here with two cat heads with the open mouth, and then here I am starting to cut them down the center and open them up. So the one on the left was inverted when I attached it, so this is part of the process. Then I go in and add some details, add some texture that I call alien texture. And then here's the final piece, glazed. I also want to talk about, maybe you've noticed there's crystals in the work. Sometimes they're real crystals, and sometimes they're built out of clay like this. So there are these crystal forms protruding out of the eyes. There's a couple reasons I do this. One, there's a real visceral quality to my work, and I think it's interesting to complement that with something that's geometric, something that's neutral, such as a rock that comes from the earth. Another reason is I think a lot about the process of ceramics and how it's akin to rock formation and geology. The process of working with clay. Clay starts out as malleable. It transforms many times through the process. It hardens as it dries. It firms up even more when it's fired. We put glaze on it, and then we fire. The glaze melts onto our piece. A lot of those glazes are crystalline, so it's very much akin to igneous rock formation. So it makes sense that it would naturally creep into my work because I am thinking about this a lot. And then I'll just show you a side view. You can see the cat heads here, perhaps, and then their noses and the crystals, some unicorn horns. And again, sometimes I'll go back to that other work that I showed you of, working with a truncated female form, but now it has one of these like Alienware heads. So very much predator inspired, but still with a nice wig and a beautiful pearl necklace. And also, a lot of my work, I've made a lot of snake sculptures. I've edited down because I have a lot of things to talk about, so this is the only snake sculpture I'm going to show you, but sometimes they're also hidden in the work. For instance, sometimes the interior of the mouth, so I was talking about the hard palates, I'm actually looking at images of the interior of a snake mouth. So you can see this snake sculpture here, it's very subtle, but it still has a flayed head to tie it back in with the Alienware work. And this last summer, I was in Berlin for a residency, a ceramic residency, and I wanted to make work that I could fit in my suitcase. So this becoming 2 pieces was really a practical decision. But what I really liked about it, so it's another flayed head in 2 pieces, but I realized how reminiscent it was of a geode, which ties into the things I've talked about and how much I think about this process being related to rock formation. So I really like that idea a lot, which is one reason I added this really crazy texture on the inside and then glazed it differently. I was thinking about how exciting it is to crack open a geode. Here you can see it from the side view. So the head that is flayed is actually, it's a bat head, but of course I'm taking artistic license and just doing whatever I want. So the eye sockets are more like a bat skull, whereas the mouth and nose area are more like a living bat. And now, so all the things I've talked about, I basically am just continuing to do more and more. So this piece, I'm going to show you 3 views of it. The image that I started with was a bat head. Then I cut it down the center. You can't see it yet because it's on the other side, and opened it up. Then I did a predator mouth, which is here. But then I cut it down the center, and I opened it up. And I was thinking more about truly being 3D and how I can make a piece that's really alluding to really having no end. And I'm also thinking about how these images, like a cat head or a bat head, would look through a kaleidoscope, how they become kind of psychedelic in a 2D image. And I'm trying to translate that into a sculpture. These are the things I'm thinking about. So the image becomes more and more distorted. Maybe you can see the references of predator in there, and maybe not. And then we're going to walk around this to the right. So here you can see a profile, probably of a bat head. See that? Mouth open, teeth. And then we've got some crystals. We've got some other things. We're going to walk around a little bit more to the right. And here's the other side. No, I don't say the back. The piece is in the round. And also, I want to talk about the glazing here is quite different than the wall piece that I showed you earlier. That was the mandrel where parts were separated and delineated. What I'm thinking about now is how I can make this work feel a little bit more like it's a mineral or a fossil. Again, just tying it back into the idea of like rock formation and how that's related to that process. I like that because what happens is the viewer, I've seen this happen, is maybe seduced by this surface, this iridescent surface, and comes to the piece. Then there's a slower reveal that happens with the images. It takes them a lot longer to see that there might be a head in there, or see that there might be a sharp tooth, or maybe it's a claw. So I really like this different pacing and this slower reveal. It's to me, it's exciting because, again, I'm grappling with the fact that I make stagnant objects that don't move, but this is a way to really entice the viewer and keep them engaged. And here's another version, Indigo Kush. You can see the profiles looking out of a beast. And then you see some other things that maybe you've noticed before, crystals, pearls, shells, intestine-like forms. Here's the other side. Now I'm going to talk about something else. So another thing that I do is a project called Heather Metal Parking Lot. Last summer was the 4th annual, so we do it every summer. We is myself and 3 other artists. When I was a resident at the Wassaic Project in 2014, Wassaic is upstate New York, 2 hours north of the city. My 3 friends and I did a party that was very small scale at the time. What we were thinking of is a film from the 80s, late 80s, with Winona Ryder and Christian Slater called Heathers. And we were also thinking of another film from the 80s that's called Heavy Metal Parking Lot, which that film is a documentary that takes place outside of a Judas Priest concert before they played. And the guy with the video camera was just walking around talking to people that were partying in the parking lot. So what we wanted to do is combine this idea of this dark comedy, Heathers, which takes place in high school that involves murder, and then Heavy Metal Parking Lot. So we do a party called Heavy Metal Parking Lot. It's very involved. It was so successful and fun the first year when we were residents that the Wassaic Project invited us to come back. It's now part of their regular programming. The short version is we have corporate sponsorship to throw this big metal party. There's a lot of components to it, so I'm going to tell you, I'm going to try not to forget anything. So it's an outdoor party that starts at night in upstate New York, usually starts at 8 p.m. We roast a pig on a spit because early years we used to show Conan the Barbarian films. So we do have an outdoor screen that we project movies or other things onto. So there's kind of dinner at 8, and then we also have kegs of beer, and then we also have a lot of artists involved doing projects. When I say artists, I mean like last year we had 3 tattoo artists giving tattoos outside. We had somebody giving metal manicures, and what that just means is they're either matte black or they were nails with pentagrams on them. We had somebody doing effects makeup, like sci-fi horror effects makeup for people at the party. We always have a gigantic fire. We just like start a little fire and have a huge pile of wood, and that's all you need. It becomes an interactive piece. We had an artist create 30 slip cast skulls that were placed in the fire, flames coming out of the skulls. I mean, it's a lot of stuff like this. We have DJs. So we actually had 4 metal DJs last year. The first one played a hair metal set, so that's like Motley Crue, Metallica, Iron Maiden, those kind of bands. The second DJ played a stoner metal set, so that's like Sleep, Bong Ripper, Ohm, those kind of bands. Then the third DJ played more like black metal and ambient metal, so kind of progressively got a lot more intense. Really, really loud outdoor party with a fire. It's not necessarily political, but it's definitely cathartic and super fun. So this is just a view of that, and some other views. Some getting lip tattoos, which seems hardcore, but it's hidden, so it's not that hardcore. And there you see our pig that we roasted, and fire, and more stuff. Skulls in the fire. And leading up to this, we do a lot of posting on mostly Instagram. So we create a lot of GIFs. So one of the artists involved, who's my friend Chris, he kind of makes a lot of the videos. So here's one, and all of the images are just taken from previous parties. So this was not for this recent summer. This was from the one prior. Last summer was the 3rd year, so that's why it's Heather Metal Parking Lot 3D. We actually showed a 3D movie as one of the films, Friday the 13th Part 3D, and we handed out blue and red glasses, so people were all hanging out outside watching this 3D movie. And also I should say that we always change the font up every year. We make t-shirts, and it's always inspired by a different metal band. So this particular year's, which was 2015, was Judas Priest. This recent year was AC/DC. I want to play this one more time because I know it goes by really fast. Okay, moving on. I'm going to show you this other video just to give you an idea. Now what we're starting to do, instead of showing just full-length films at the party, for instance, the last DJ who plays the black metal set will show images like I'm about to show you, or like professional female bodybuilders. to give you an idea. We don't take ourselves too seriously. We have to remember the Heather's part of the whole thing. And so yeah, I'm just going to show you some images. Here's someone getting a tattoo. Just love that image. She's awesome. And then the last couple of years, we have invited a couple artists to kind of document the people at the party. So a couple years ago, they did death portraits of everyone, took black and white photos of people in a coffin. And then after they were finished, the coffin ended up getting thrown in the fire. A lot of things just end up getting thrown in the fire, like some things that shouldn't really, like TVs that work, but we won't talk about that. And then this recent summer, this is myself and Robin King, so here we're collaborating again. I really hate to use the word performance, so I'm going to try to not use that word. But we just did a little cheerleading thing. Anyway, Robin messes up, so I don't want to show you that part. And then this is us. So this year, instead of photographing, the artists photographing people black and white in the coffin, they had a different setup, which is the devil, somebody dressed as a devil, and an altar, and then you see the pentagram. And so here's us being hams, but we have masks on, so no one knows who we are. And then this is just late night, beautiful image of Heather Metal parking lot. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk about is a project called Nasty Women Exhibitions. So, as you guys all know, we had a terrible election last year. And right after that happened, I was really depressed and seriously had a hard time getting out of bed. And I went to, the election was Wednesday night. I went to a protest to Trump Tower that Saturday. So the images on the bottom are from the protest. There I am with some female friends. And prior to that, I really was having a hard time functioning. And I know I wasn't alone in that feeling. But once I was at the protest, being surrounded by hundreds and thousands of people of all ages and colors and genders and everything, it was really, really a cathartic experience. It helped me a lot. It helped my emotions transition from feeling so defeated into feeling rage. And that motivated me and mobilized me. And I think that happened to a lot of people. So that Monday that followed that Saturday, I did a little post on Facebook. So Facebook can be good for some things. So here's a quote from the Huffington Post. Jackson was hardly alone in her feelings of disbelief, anger, and fear. But she didn't realize the extent of her support until November 14th, when she spontaneously posted a call out on Facebook. Hello, female artists/curators. Let's organize a Nasty Women group show. Who's interested? I did write that, and I did tag like a handful of people in my circle that were artists and curators and writers. Honestly, I had no idea. The post went absolutely, completely viral, very fast. Quickly, I had to get organized. So I brought in somebody, Jessamine Fiore, who's a curator I know, and I invited her to be the curator. But there's so many people that were interested, hundreds of people actually started sending me images and posting them on my Facebook, that Jessamine and I quickly realized that we couldn't curate a typical show, that we really needed to figure out a way to just accept all the work, just let anyone be in the show who wanted to. So that's what we decided to do, but we needed a plan in order to do that. And we knew that we'd probably get a lot of work. We didn't know that we'd be showing almost 700 pieces. It would have been a lot more if we didn't have a cutoff date. So I'm going to show you some images, but just to give you an idea, since the inaugural exhibition that we did in New York, there have been more than 70 other nasty venues across the globe, from Chiang Mai, Thailand, Amsterdam, and Mexico City, to various cities in Texas, which is a red state, and various cities in Arizona, and many more. For more information on this, feel free to visit the website under other nasty venues. So we did this exhibition at a venue in Queens, New York called the Knockdown Center. Jessamine's conveniently on the board. So we were able to secure this space right before the presidential inauguration. This space has a lot of windows, as you can see, hardly any walls. So our solution was to build these freestanding letters and then attach all the work to that. So this is just a plan that we created early on. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what the show is, our mission statement that's on the website, in case you don't know what I'm talking about. Nasty Women is a global art movement that serves to demonstrate solidarity among artists who identify with being a nasty woman in the face of threats to roll back women's rights, individual rights, and abortion rights. Nasty Women exhibitions also serves to support organizations defending these rights and to be a platform for organization and resistance. There is a way and information for anyone to organize their own show, and if you're interested, please visit the website. The only criteria that we have in order to put things actually on our website is that we really want the artists in the show, we want a diverse population as much as possible, and there needs to be a fundraising component to charity of the venue's choice. So now we're at the Knockdown Center, and here we have some volunteers building the letters. Almost 200 volunteers helped us with this one exhibition. These happen to be all female, but we also had lots of men help us, such as these guys. So now we're in the space assembling the letters. Then they get covered with mesh. Well, now they're freestanding. And then here is right before the opening. This is just the word nasty. We also have women. It was really hard to photograph the whole thing. So the artwork, as you can see, is on both the front and the back of the letters. And the T, both front and back, and the sides, because the sides had monitors in them, showed the video works that were on a loop, so they were constantly changing. Here's women. And just to give you some ideas to see some of the work. A lot of the artists in the show, well, some of them were very well-known artists, and some of them were people who had literally never been in a show their entire life. So what we were interested in doing, or the format of the display and the installation helped us, was we wanted a visual that demonstrated the solidarity of these female identifying artists coming together, and I think this installation did do that. But also what it did is it created an exhibition that was egalitarian. So famous person's artwork next to someone who made an art piece for the first time in their life because they wanted to be in the show. Everything for the same price, $100 or less. And then here's just some individual pieces. I bought the blonde. I own that one, $100. And then all of the money that we made, which we actually sold out and made $50,000 in a weekend, was donated to Planned Parenthood. And in case you don't know what that is, I've abbreviated their mission statement for you. Planned Parenthood believes in the fundamental right of each individual throughout the world to manage his or her fertility regardless of the individual's income, marital status, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, national origin, or residence. We believe that respect and value for diversity are essential to well-being, and that reproductive self-determination must be voluntary and preserve the individual's right to privacy. So they basically get comprehensive reproductive and complementary healthcare services. They have educational programming on human sexuality. They do a lot of things. We got a lot of press for this show. A lot of this press was before the show even opened. This is only some of the press. So you can see the hyperallergic title was Massive Nasty Women Art Show raises $35K from Planned Parenthood opening night. That's true. So in the opening night, we almost sold out $35,000 that night. The show was up for 4 days. So by the end of the day, there was no more work. Everything sold. But again, everything was $100 or less. So that's still $50,000 is a lot of money. Lots of press here. And then this is just some images. I'm going to show you the actual opening. There were more than 2,200 people there in 3 hours. This is the front of the letters. And we had a lot of volunteers working the letters. It was a cash carry event. So whatever you bought, you took with you that night. And then this is standing behind the letters. So you can see the space that's gigantic was packed. And then this is myself and the other 10 organizers that made this happen. Or I guess there's only some, they're not all pictured there. Maybe that's 9 organizers. And then you can see a little clip of the letters that are naked at the end of the night. And that thank you is just for everyone that helped with this project and continues to do so. And that's it. This is the pentagram at Heather Metal parking lot being burned.
Well, thanks for your talk. You briefly said you used the words tough kitsch. And I thought that was like a really interesting.
Tough kitsch.
Sorry, I'll say it louder. You used the word tough kitsch. I was wondering if you could just talk about that a bit more.
Well, that was referring to the Gorilla Paw piece. So I still kind of consider that kitsch because it's an ashtray, but what I meant by that was that it was drawing from some harsh reality that gorillas were killed and their hands were chopped off. That's pretty brutal, and people actually bought that. So that's actually what I was referring to. So follow up? Should I elaborate?
I just thought it was like a really interesting pairing of words. I just thought that was a really seductive title.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever said that before. So I'm gonna borrow your pen, thank you, and I'm gonna write it down. I have an ongoing potential title list on my phone that's quite long, so add that one. Thanks for pointing it out. Wasn't really aware I said that.
There was, just on your chops as a writer, there was something else you said that was amazing. Something about a desire to smash open things, something. I forget what it was. But a good phrase, a good leading phrase. I'm wondering about the titles and the writing behind the work. Obviously, text and language are important enough to hang the exhibition on. In the Nasty Women exhibition. Do you have a writing practice? Do you write things down before you visualize them, or?
Your question is about the writing for Nasty Women?
The writing, well, the titles are great.
So the titles of my work?
Titles of your
okay,
work,
yeah.
General question about your relationship with writing and language.
Well, the titles, am I using 2 mics? Is it weird? Do I need to push this away?
No, it's
okay.
fine.
The titles for my work are from a lot of different things. Maybe some of you noticed some of them are song titles. I mean, a lot of times if I'm doing that or if the title is really funny, like for instance, the 2 pieces that were on the platform where their faces are connected with yarn, that's kind of an intense image. So the title of that piece is Don't Stop Believing, because when there is a little bit of humor in the work, I think that, and I did talk about humor, but maybe I didn't say like one reason I think that's important is it provides some levity to the work. So people can connect with it hopefully at different layers, and it's so it's not off-putting, and so in a way maybe it mimics life a little bit more. So a lot of them are song titles. Some of them are song titles from like metal songs like Motor Breath. The skull with the knife in it is a Metallica song. I just thought that was, funny. Other titles, like more recent work, there's one title called Microdosing, and that's the idea of like basically taking very small amounts of LSD and how that can, benefit one, help people overcome depression. It's sort of relating to this idea also of psychedelia and the complexities of the mind. And I don't think I talked about it, but a lot of in this work, I'm also interested in sort of drawing from this idea of psychedelia, however you interpret that, through an experience of like doing hallucinogens or even like talking about the 60s and that kind of artwork that came from there, because to me that's related to mysticism and kind of spirituality, and also visually. I think a lot of the work that I make, for instance, when I was talking about how I was interested in how a kaleidoscopic image can become 3-dimensional, this is all related to other ways of seeing. And so some of the titles are sort of loosely alluding to that. They might seem very tongue-in-cheek, but to me there's also other meaning behind it. For Nasty Women, that I'm not really sure what writing you're talking about, but like the statement about what the project was, we collectively did that as a group. So myself and all the core organizers had a lot of meetings kind of figuring out what this is, especially once it started getting very, very popular. We knew we were going to talk to press. We needed to kind of get our stories straight. A lot of the volunteers had all different kind of areas of expertise related to the art world. So some had just worked in galleries for a long time. Some worked with press for a long time. So we all kind of pulled our resources together. We were forced to get organized very, very quickly because this thing just kept snowballing. And every time we weren't expecting anything that happened in the amount that it did. So we were constantly like trying to catch up with ourselves. And I think, what other writing? Any other writing?
Okay. I bet other people have way better questions.
Okay. That was a good question.
Yeah, I guess I went to the Nasty Women show. My band played on Sunday, actually.
In New York?
Yeah, in New York at the Knockdown Center, and it was pretty cool. We did have an experience there where we were playing, it was like a like a punk / metal band kind of.
And you were in that band?
Yeah.
What was the name of the band?
Tawanda.
I was in Belgium, so I actually missed the end, but
well, that's
awesome.
But
Sorry, I missed it.
yeah, we were playing and someone came in because we were kind of in a side room, and they said they came in because they assumed it was men playing, and they were wondering why like a male band was playing at the Nasty Women show.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just wondering about like your interest in heavy metal culture. Just like having been in that band, I like experienced a lot of weird stuff in terms of men and how they felt about women playing heavy music, and I wonder how you engage with, like, how you feel about engaging with that culture that's like pretty hostile to women, while also having this like clearly feminist stance. Yeah.
Well, I'm not really engaging with the heavy metal culture. I mean, I do this party, and it's really important for us to have a component that's not just male dominated. For instance, most of the artists that are invited to do a project are female, and not just us cheerleaders, which don't think I didn't think about that, like, oh, females are cheerleading. But so, you know, we're not just doing a metal party. Again, it's important for us to have this Heather component. So one of the organizers is really interested in bringing drag performance to the event. So it's not like I'm not like hanging out with heavy metal bands ever, really. I mean, my interest in it is I like to draw on subversive culture, subversive pop culture with my work, and also I listen to metal music. Not all the time. I listen to a lot of things, and I guess we did have a speaker this year that has written a bunch of books. Right before the party started, I can't remember his name right now, but we had a speaker who wrote like the anthology of heavy metal music, and he read out of his book. I actually wasn't there because I was a host for a party getting ready to do it, but he was recalling a lot of stories because he hung out with Anthrax and Anvil and like all these bands in the 80s, where it was very aggressive, maybe aggressive towards women, or definitely way more sexist at the time. And he was actually sharing some of these stories, and that kind of came up in the discussion. I wasn't there, but I heard about it, where some people were even asking him, you know, what his opinions were from hanging out with these bands that maybe exploited women and like just partied really hard. And his take on that was that he was just a journalist, kind of talking to them about what it was like during this time, and that he was just relaying information back. He didn't necessarily agree with them, but it was interesting that this really came up like right before the event from our guest who was like reading from his book. But yeah, as for the party, I don't think the party is like overtly male or sexist. It's really silly, actually. Maybe it seems really intense, but it's very silly. And most of the images that Well, for instance, one of the films that one of the DJs played is a scene that he extrapolated. He extrapolated all these parts from horror films where the female was running from someone or something, and he looped them all together. So you never saw what was chasing a female. You only saw that a female was running. So it was like all these different 20 movies, just a female running. And there's something about that with metal music playing and you're looking at this image on a loop. I mean, I don't think that's sexist. I think that was more about like calling to attention some of the tendencies that has happened in culture and film through sexism. And also, we've really made a point to, when the DJs are playing, they're not just playing bands that have male vocals, but they're also playing bands with female vocals. So I don't know, maybe you need to send me some songs.
You can belt it out. This isn't working after all.
I guess it's just two things. One is a comment, and it would be like how you were in the ceramics society, or like doing ceramics and breaking this format of like precious pots. So kind of making ceramics more metal, and then you do this thing with metal where it's like this dominant like male sort of attitude, but spin it on a different head and make it more accessible for different people. Like, I think that's interesting how you're taking these two opposite things and kind of bringing them both to a similar place. But my question is just really general. It's how do people, are people allowed to go to Heather Metal Parking Lot, or is it like a closed group? Is it like an open festival thing, or?
I don't like to call it a festival because I like to call it the anti-festival, but anyone can go, except we have limited tickets. You actually have to buy a ticket. Early bird tickets are $25 now. It just sounds like a sales pitch. Then they go up to $35. But one thing that's really important to us is we don't want it to turn into a festival, and we don't want it to grow any bigger than it is.
Yeah.
Right now it's like 125 people, so tickets sell out. So when you buy a ticket and you go, everything's free once you're there, like beer, pig, tattoos. So it's a good deal. So yeah, anyway, you should just keep an eye out on Instagram because actually the thing is we really only advertise it mainly on Instagram. The Wasaic Project doesn't want to make it very prominent on their website because we want to we want to sort of keep it, we want to kind of be able to invite people. We just want to make sure that we keep it safe. If it just sounds like it's a metal party where it's really not just a metal party, then that could mess things up. So most of the people that come, they're artists from New York, or they're local artists, or they're current residents at the Wasaic Project, or their staff. So they know what this party is about. And also we have a security guard there. So, so people feel safe. But yeah, you can go.
Okay.
Thank you.
In your work, you're drawing on like symbolism and traditions from both popular culture and like spirituality and mysticism and the occult, and it seems kind of merging them all together. And I'm just curious to hear you speak more about your relationship with the different kinds of cultures you're drawing from, and how you see them relating to each other in the work.
Well, I mean, I think if I'm interpreting your question correctly, I think what you're talking about is that sometimes, like Fiji Mermaid, for instance, I kind of, one thing I'm thinking about with that is how it's sort of the sacred and the profane coming together. I mean, it's not really sacred, but at one point in time, these were regarded as important specimens. But at the same time, I also think of them as like folk art because somebody was building these objects. But it's also the idea, it's related to this idea of myth, but it's like a profound myth because just the whole story of how they originally posited as being something real and then it wasn't. So I'm interested in like having this mashup or these contradictions. So sometimes there's something that's like sacred and profane. I like to do that for many reasons, have these conflicts happening. So even the hand with the yoga mudra, and the heavy metal, because I think that it's very easy for Western contemporary culture to polarize things. Things are good, things are bad. Things are evil, and otherwise. And I don't think like that. I want to challenge that notion. I think that there's a lot of blurry lines in between. I don't think listening to metal music makes you an evil person. And I don't think just because you do yoga, because this is also a yoga mudra, then you're enlightened. It's more complex than that. And so to me, this feels more accurate. There's a tension that might happen visually and conceptually with the work, which to me is another way to engage the viewer, or another way to sort of have charge to a piece that is sculpture, that's not going to move. Again, I'm always thinking about that. In a way, it's like a frustration. This is a stagnant thing. It's never going to go anywhere. How can I give it life? Or how can I give it some kind of charge? And I think one way to do that is to have tension in the work. So these are the things I'm thinking about. Plus, I've done a lot of things, so I feel like I can draw from all of those areas. I feel like anything, I can draw from anything, because that's how I'm interpreting the world, regurgitating this information and putting it in my piece. And I think that's something that a lot of artists do.
I'm just going to sort of piggyback on your question. I'm also interested in how you reflect on sort of the transformation of some of these themes like shamanism and nature, animal world, primal fear, myth, and the body, and how do you reflect on sort of all of this content being transformed into a kitsch commodity language?
Well, after I make a piece, I don't know. It exists on its own in the world. And what I want is for images to be more open to interpretation by the viewer. So I'm thinking in a way of like the Rorschach test that used ink blots, so this abstract image, and by subjects interpreting that, they might provide some insight into their subconscious mind. So when I'm making a work, there's a lot of intuition that's happening, but I have an idea that's based on a lot of things, whatever is relevant for the piece. So I am sort of drawing from my personal experience. I've done a lot of traveling and other things that I probably shouldn't talk about. So, I consider myself a spiritual person. I have experiences related to that. So I'm thinking about how my experiences can be channeled through some kind of image. So for instance, referencing psychedelia or psychedelic culture or something sort of spiritual might have engaged the viewer in a different way, or might make them think of this or make them think of that. But once a piece exists in space and is finished, it's like sort of mine because I made it, but it's its own thing. Do you understand what I mean? And I can't really say what it is anymore, because the way that it's going to really have a life is if people are interpreting it and bringing their own thing to the piece. I don't remember, you had a whole list of things. I don't remember everything you said, but again, yeah, I'm drawing from myth. I'm drawing from kitsch. I'm drawing from all these things that I'm interested in and inspired by. It's like a soup, Again, it's just like that's part of life. So we draw from that and interpret it through a piece. That's the way I work. Lots of images. I hope I answered your question. I'm not really exactly sure what your question was, but
I guess it's just the tension between using kitsch as a subversive language, but then actually producing objects whose function in the world is specifically as commodity objects. They're being sold as art. And they're like beautiful, really seductive objects. So to me, it's just like this really interesting tension, which is, sort of as you're saying, the life of the objects is very specific. They enter sort of the art market as commodities, and so I'm just interested in the transformation between sort of the content that you're dealing with into commodity objects that use the language of the kitsch. So I just find there's like really rich tension as you're saying that, and I'm wondering how you reflect on that tension.
if I sell my work, that's great. I love selling my work. And I also sometimes don't love to sell it because because I actually like a lot of things and I want to keep them. But I've actually had to train myself that it's okay to sell work, because that is part of the system and that is how it works. And I'm not interested in being a folk artist and making work in secrecy that nobody ever sees, because to me, it's very important for me to get my work into the world. Otherwise, I'm not communicating. I'm only talking to myself. And the way that that works, fortunately or unfortunately, is if there are sales. I'm not rich by selling work. I have a job. I have a full-time teaching job. But I do sell work sometimes, and I am totally okay with it, because you know what? I built it, and it takes a long time, and I'll get paid for that.
You say you're superstitious, and also you talk about mysticism, superstition, occultism. Do you approach it maybe more in your art, less in your personal life, as a skeptic, or as a believer, or as both?
A believer. I didn't say I was superstitious. But no, I approach it as a believer.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I feel like I believe in everything.
Okay.
Definitely not a skeptic. I think we should stop, or maybe one more.
Okay, there was one at the back here. Can we get?
Okay.
It's like we could go on forever.
Yeah.
around the
I mean,
fire.
got to wrap it up at some
Okay.
point.
Go for it.
Tell me if I don't speak loud enough, but my question is about, because we have seen the imagery of cheerleader in your work.
I'm sorry, what?
The imagery of children.
Cheerleader.
Cheerleader.
Cheerleader?
She knows.
Cheerleader?
Cheerleaders.
Yeah, we see, like, I'm curious about why you use it in your work and what does it represent for you, and if it's something that is like, because you explained you don't see something as bad or as good, but like it isn't bad or it isn't good, so how do you see this, like, cliche?
You're talking about the cheerleading, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, just for clarification, I didn't say or mean to say that I don't think things are bad or good. I do think certain things are very bad and that other things are good. But really what I was talking about earlier was how what we have a tendency to really polarize things, and then the middle sort of gets lost. The cheerleading is just silly. I mean, it's not about art theory. I was a cheerleader in high school. So was my friend Robin. And we wanted to do it because we thought it would be funny and bring an interesting component to this metal party to kind of balance it out. Because I think for me, it's really important to not take myself too seriously as an artist, whatever that means. I'm a serious artist. I work hard in the studio, and I think about my work a lot. But I don't underestimate the power of humor and absurdity. And that has a long tradition in art. So it was just really because we wanted to do it, and it was super fun, and people really were surprised, and that's it. So that's why, based on personal experience, we were both cheerleaders. Now you know.
All right, let's get you out for a drink.
Okay.
Celebratory drink.